there's probably going to be some bad language in this, so you might not want to let the kids watch. Hey everyone, Wino's back with his next Loki review. Off the top, I gotta say, I enjoyed this one, but before I get into my breakdown and my thoughts on it, just want to spend a couple of seconds, don't worry, it won't be long, just a quick rant about fucking Disney. What the fuck are they doing? I don't know if you've heard, but they're renaming Boba Fett's ship because Slave One is apparently too problematic. Ooh, thanks for your virtue, Disney. Once again, superficial virtue over virtue in reality. Because, you can't have a ship named Slave One. We can't be marketing off slavery. But you can basically use slave labor to make the toys. You can film next to Uyghur concentration camp in China and thank the Chinese government for letting you do that. It's like, what the fuck are you doing, Disney? And look, it's a reason why I've refused to spend any of my money on their shit. I've got another way that I can watch Disney Plus. Don't worry, it's fully legal. It's not streaming or anything like that. But yeah, ever since the Gina Carano firing, I've been like, I'm not giving them another cent of my money until they do some drastic changes. And this constant virtue signaling on one hand, but then the actual actions on the other being so despicable. It's like, who's running that place? They're disgusting, really. And I hate it because I love the MCU and I love a lot of other things that they're now in control of. And I've kind of got to suck it up and watch their product if I want to watch the things I love. So fuck you, Disney. But anyway, that's my little rant at the top. And getting into the episode, I thought it was a great one. And straight off the bat of the episode, it seemed like my earlier theories of the Timekeepers being totalitarian and being bad guys was being solidified. By the end of the episode, it was confirmed. And when I made that prediction, I didn't think it was that out there and that hard to believe. But I did see other reviews of the show that kind of didn't pick up on that. They were like going, look at this terrible kangaroo court that Loki's in and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, that to me, that seems like the point. It seems like we're going to reveal throughout the show that they're assholes and they shouldn't be in control. And that's definitely the line we're going down now, because it started with Sylvie as a little girl in Valhalla, just playing with her ship, a little toy ship, and TVA, Judge Lady, was leading this crew of hunters, and she was a hunter at the time, nabbing her and saying, you're a variant, you've messed with the timeline, pulling her through the door. And then her experience through the TVA seemed a lot scarier than Loki's in the first episode. Loki's had a bit of a comical lean to it, whereas this was through the eyes of a scared little girl, so it made sense for it to be more scary, but it also played up the authoritarian nature of it. And yeah, that you could just grab a child without charge and put them through this process, it solidified for me that, yeah, they're going down the road of these guys being bad dudes. And Sylvie pickpockets Judge Lady, gets her little gizmo that lets you create time doors, and she escaped through that. And yeah, that's where we find out kind of how she came into it. We go back to Lamentus 1, and see Loki and Sylvie there waiting for the apocalypse to come. There was a little moment where, because last time I said they seemed into each other, but especially Loki into Sylvie, and Loki said something and Sylvie kind of caresses his arm, and I'm like, ooh, it seems like Sylvie's into Loki too. And then we were about to have another little Star Wars moment. Like I said last time, they bit from Star Wars a little bit, and they seemed like they were biting from it again when Sylvie and Loki were basically letting the apocalypse come to them and kind of just holding hands and ready to take it. It seemed very Cassian Andor and Jyn Erso-ish to me, but it didn't end the same because the doors popped up and they got pulled back into the TVA. Now, quickly, before I'll get into that. Their little chat on Lamentus exposed that Sylvie was actually born Sylvie. She said she was born the goddess of mischief. So this popped off a little question in my head about how this all works. Like, I thought people making variants to the timeline was like them kind of making decisions that weren't on the approved thing. I didn't think you could just be born different and have that be your crime, but it seems like that's a possibility too. So I don't know. I feel like I need a little more explanation about how these parallel universes and whatnot work. And are they parallel universes and the TVA is just trying to sink them all into one? But yeah, little confusion there. But anyway, they get sucked back into the TVA and they both kind of get separated and they're about to be, interrogated again and whatnot. Loki gets put into like a time jail thing, and it was good to see a little cameo from Lady Sif. Always love to see a bit of Lady Sif. So that's what he was stuck in. Little loop of her being pissed off at him, cutting her hair off and coming out and hitting him all the time. And this revelation, I mean, this little situation did leave him to a bit of a revelation by the end of it, because by the end he convinced her not to hit him anymore, but she still said the same thing she'd said every time she did hit him, which is like, you are alone and you'll always be alone. And Loki kind of like, he really felt that. Oh, we've also already had a little scene between Judge Lady and Mobius, and apparently C20, who is the hunter who Sylvie got in the head of to figure out where the Timekeepers were, she's dead, apparently. And at this moment, it seemed like Judge Lady was being a little cagey, and she was like, she died. Like, she was infected with basically a mind virus by being enchanted, and she went worse and worse, and then she died. And I'm like, she didn't explain how she killed her, and I'm thinking, seems to me like they killed her and they're covering it up now. I'm not going to get credit for thinking that, because as by the end of the episode we find out, yes, that is the case. That's exactly what happened. But back to Loki in his time jail. Mobius comes, pulls him out, and is ready to interrogate him. And we have what the series is basically becoming known for: a chat with two people over a table. And I've heard some people like criticize that we get this so much and say, oh, it's boring and stuff like that. But man, I generally like when it happens. And I liked this one too. And when I thought about it, I'm like, some of my favorite scenes ever are two people chatting over a table. Dark Knight is one of my favorite scenes. My favorite movies. My favorite scene in it is the interrogation scene where Batman and Joker are chatting to each other over a table. The Mandalorian, my favorite scene in that, besides Luke showing up at the end, was the Bill Burr and the army guy scene where he ends up shooting him at the end. And yes, there's three guys around that table, but Mando is being very quiet in that scene. It's basically Bill Burr and that asshole sergeant or general or whatever he was. One of my favorite scenes. Bloody Inglourious Bastards, the opening scene with Hans Landa and the French guy sheltering the Jews under the floorboard. That's those two talking over a table, and it's great. Then later in that movie, you've got a great scene where he's kind of toying with, I forget her name, but the one who she was under the floorboards at that time, and then she goes to own the movie theater, and you never know, but you feel like Hans knows who she is, and he's playing with her, manipulating her, and they have the strudel with the cream and everything like that. It's really tense, really exciting. Great fucking scene. And then another scene in Inglourious Bastards, it wasn't two people over a table, but I'm all around a table playing celebrity heads that ends up in the big shootout. The tension in that scene. Like, sitting people around a table to have a tense conversation works for me in a lot of cases, and it's worked for me in most of the instances in Loki so far. And it did in this case. What we got was Mobius and Loki both lying to each other to try to get an end to their means, a means to their end, I should say. And Loki lied about him and Sylvie, like she showed up in Asgard. I called it Valhalla before. It's Asgard. Showed up in Asgard and fucking they plotted a scheme together, hatched a plot together, and have been working together. That's a lie, but he said that to Mobius because it's like he knows that's what Mobius wanted to hear. And then Mobius lies to him by saying Sylvie died, and he could see written all over Loki's face. And we basically get it confirmed in this scene that Loki is into her, he's in love with her. And just like I said last time, Mobius is like, see, you're such a narcissist that you fell in love with a version of yourself. And I'm like, yeah, that made total sense for Loki, which I said in the last video. And then right at the end of that conversation, Loki's like, the TVA's lying to you, you're all variants, they took you away from a life you had and have basically made you slaves in this environment to work for their ends. And Mobius didn't quite believe him, but you could see there was a tinge of belief in it, and that was kind of solidified by when they were putting Loki back into the time door with the Sif loop, and he's like, the biggest liar in here is you. And Mobius is like, why? Because I made the thing up about your little girlfriend dying. And he's like, no, the biggest lies you tell are to yourself. And we do see Mobius throughout the rest of the episode kind of feeling that, not quite believing Judge Lady, not quite believing the TVA, and thinking he needs to investigate it a little bit. Now, quick reminder to myself about what happened next. Yes, well, more of their authoritarianism got confirmed with B-15, who's big bad hunter broad. Now we got a name for her, B-15, looking at a poster that says like something like, did you get all the variants? Well, to make sure, just fucking delete them. And it's like, oh yeah, just kill everyone that doesn't fit into your plan. Like, and very propaganda-ish little poster there. And she marches her way into where they're holding Sylvie, looking like she's going to go in and erase her. But you can tell there's something dwelling in her mind. And then she... we don't quite see what they're going to do next. But then we have a meeting with Judge Lady and Mobius. And her covering shit up becomes more evident here, because Mobius is like, C20 seemed fine to me. She was a bit shaken up, but there was nothing wrong. And Judge Lady comes up with a shitty excuse as to like, yeah, well, she goes, yeah, well, the degeneration happened, and Mobius also asked, like, why wasn't he allowed to interrogate Sylvie? And she comes up with a shitty excuse that, like, I didn't want her to mess with your mind and make you go crazy. And then he slyly gets her to, because she's got the knife from Sylvie, I believe it was, and he says, oh, where are you putting that on your trophy thing? And when she turns her back to put it up on her mantle, he switches their time gadget thingies, their time door gadgets, and he's going to check that later. Then we go back to B-15 and Sylvie. B-15 takes Sylvie through a time door back to the apocalypse where Sylvie got in her head, that rainy one in, I think it was Alabama. I don't think it was Arkansas. I remember it started with A. And she's like, did you implant these things in my head? And Sylvie's like, no, I can't do that. I can only work with real memories. And she let her remember it again. And that gets B-15 on side with Sylvie. She realizes that she had a life before the TVA, and they've taken it from her. And I've got to say, I thought this was her best acting yet. B-15's best acting yet. Because so far throughout the show, I have been a little critical of her acting, but I thought she did all right in this scene. Then I thought the timing was a little convenient, because very next scene, we get Mobius going back to see Loki in Well, no, he's going through like the library or something, and he checks the little gadget that makes the time doors, and he sees that C20 was saying to the timekeepers, "No, it was a real memory. I know it was a problem." And then Judge Lady, like, you kind of see it come in over the screen and like be like, "Ooh," and have this kind of, "Ooh," like, we can't let this get out face. So he's like, "Oh shit, they are fucking with us. We did have memories." And then he shows up and he sees Loki and he's like, "If we're gonna do this," and Loki's like, "We." So the fact that Loki and Sylvie both got their, well, not interrogators, because Mobius was interrogating Loki, but B-15 wasn't necessarily interrogating Sylvie, but they're overseers, to both get on side with them within a scene of each other. Look, the timing was a little convenient. It made sense, but it was like, oh, come on, this happened at exactly the same time. But hey, it's a show about time. Maybe we can have a bit of a, time convenience, a bit of a plot contrivance. Then, no. Mobius and Loki come out of the door, and Judge Lady's there with a bunch of people, and she prunes Mobius. Prunes what is the word that they started using in this episode for, deleting the variants, hitting them with their orange deletion stick. And it was like, no, not Mobius. And he just got disappeared into the ether. Then Judge Lady came in, saw Sylvie was all wet, and the guards at the thing were like, "Oh, B-15 told us to let her in." Like, Sylvie being wet let Judge Lady know that, oh, she's been somewhere here. What happened? She doesn't know what happened with them, but she's like, "You guys go find B-15. And she takes Loki and Sylvie to the Timekeepers. And then we finally see the Timekeepers. Maybe we saw them earlier in the episode. I kind of forget. But anyway, we see them. And I gotta say, well, they look kind of cool, but the CG was a little wonky on them. The CG seemed a little cheap. It wasn't up to the regular Marvel standards. It was a little early 2000s CG alien thing vibe going on there. And I've also got to say, their fucking voices were almost impossible to understand. They put a little too much distortion-y echo on those voices. I literally had to put the subtitles on for it. But anyway, the Timekeepers are just like, we don't want to listen to what you have to say. Kill them. And then B-15 shows up. She throws Sylvie the knife. Then we have a little action scene. It's like they realize we got to put some action in every episode or people are going to get bored, which clearly seems to be happening with other people, because I do see there being a little bit of a criticism from some people that the series is a bit boring in places. I personally don't find it that boring when it's been a bit slower and having conversations between people. I'm a big dialogue fan, though, I got to say. Quentin Tarantino is one of my favourite directors, probably my favourite. I'd have to think about it. I like Paul Thomas Anderson as well. I like the Coen brothers. But I'd have to have a big think about, because Tarantino just stands out as probably my favourite director, and there's a lot that I like about him, but one of the things I really love about him is his awesome dialogue. So I do love good dialogue. And that's not just direct, like, he writes his own shit as well. Paul Thomas Anderson, very similar. I've also been enjoying Robert Eggers a lot lately. He's only made 2 movies that I've seen, both horror movies, The Witch and The Lighthouse, and they also had very great dialogue. They used period dialogue very well to really immerse you in those movies. So I don't know. I'm maybe not the best representative of what you want to see in a comic book movie if people are calling things boring, because I like a bit of talky talk. But anyway, I digress there. They have a bit of a fight scene in the Timekeepers chamber at the end. The Lokis win, and they throw a knife up at one of the Timekeepers. Head gets chopped off, and lo and behold, we get a big revelation that they're robots or androids. So someone else is in charge of them. Ooh. And then Loki got disappeared with the disappeary pruny stick. And I was like, no, not Loki. And for a minute here, I was thinking, look, it's a good moment, but I'll be very disappointed if the show goes on from here without Loki. Like, maybe they'll try to find a way to bring him back. But even if you picked a Loki up from the timeline, it wouldn't be this Loki who's learnt all this stuff and had these experiences. And it'd be like, we've already lost one Loki that we love, and now we lose another one, and now we're just going to start again. It's like, too much treading water. But there was a little surprise right at the end that could have changed that. But yeah, before they actually went up in the elevator, we had basically, I know I'm shooting back here, but it was pretty important to my mind. We basically had confirmation that Judge Lady is a bad guy. I was thinking, like, it seems like they might be making her bad, but maybe, it's pretty unlikely for Disney to make a woman of color be a villain. I know in Falcon and Winter Soldier, the Flag Smashers girl was a woman of color and she was a villain, but they also made excuses for her quite often and said don't call her a terrorist. Although they did have her own organization realize she was going a little too far off the deep end and she was somewhat villainous. But I mean, the hero of the show, Sam himself, was like, don't call her a terrorist, don't call her a villain. And it's like, I mean, she is a terrorist. She was doing terroristic things. But they seem to have, just fully allowed Judge Lady to be a villain. And we get to the end where Sylvie kind of has her at her mercy. Loki's already disappeared. Everyone else has been fucked up in the time chamber. I don't quite remember what happened to B-15. And the Timekeepers have been exposed as robots. And Judge Lady's like, all right, just do it. Just kill me. And Sylvie's like, no, not until I find out everything you know. Boom, cut, end of episode. Ends on a big cliffhanger. I was like, whoa, that was pretty good. Pretty big revelations in that episode. I also liked that the episode was very main story of the entire series driven. Like, we had a little side quest last episode, but I was glad that they got back into the main thrust of the story and we got some pretty big story moments. And yeah, I was happy with the episode, but I was also very cautious about what they were going to do with Loki, with him being dead, as I already said. But then we get our first post-credit scene for the whole series, and Loki wakes up and he's like, oh, am I dead? And he hears someone say, not. He's like, is this hell? And he's like, not yet, but come with us or it will be soon, something like that. And he looks up and there's 3 Lokis, although I think it's 4 Lokis, because, I mean, I didn't notice at first because you only see him for a bit and I wasn't fully taken in their faces, but then I saw the credits and it said special guest appearance Richard E. Grant, and I was like, who was he in the episode? Was he one of the voices, the Timekeepers? But then I went back to check who those Lokis were just to get a feel for it. And yes, Richard E. Grant was one of the Lokis. I'll say he was the Loki that was wearing the hokey Loki costume. It was very kind of old school spandex, kind of like Adam West style, Adam West Batman style Loki. And then there was a black Loki. I'm guessing he's a Loki because the other ones seemed like Lokis. Then there was a kid with a crocodile on his lap. And I'm like, is the kid a Loki? But the crocodile's also got Loki's horn helmet on it. So the crocodile might be a Loki and maybe the kid's his servant. But then I was like, you know what? Maybe they're actually 4 Lokis. Maybe the kid's a Loki, Richard E. Grant's a Loki, there's a black Loki, and a crocodile Loki. It'd be interesting. It'd definitely be interesting to see a crocodile Loki. But yeah, that's where we ended it. So, I mean, in some ways, you could be like, oh, they kind of sucked the air out of the Loki death immediately. And as much as I was like, I hope he's not out of it for the rest of the series and they just pluck another Loki from somewhere, I hope we get this Loki back. So I was happy to see that at the end. I still would have been willing to go for the ride and see it next week just to see if you could get him back. But maybe they were just like, look, we don't want to enrage people too much and take away Tom Hiddleston and take away the main character and have him just rage quit the show. So in a way, who knows, maybe I would have liked the suspense a bit more, and maybe it would have been more ballsy of him to go with that approach. But I also did like that little end scene, and I did like seeing that Loki is still around. He ain't dead yet. So yeah, there we go. I'll quickly have a look. Oh, I mean, doesn't matter too much, but another thing that pinged in my head to prove that the TVA are authoritarian is when Sylvie said to B-15, "Oh, your name's a number," and I can't quite see it here. Like, that's a very authoritarian thing to do. Take people's identities away and replace their names with numbers. And, C20 was a number as well. So, quickly looking through my headlines for my recordings here. Yeah, I think I touched on everything I wanted to. So, yeah, I thought it was a good episode. And I thought it was better than the last episode. Thought it was the best episode since the first one so far, and excited to see what they do next week. I got a little muddled in my mouth there. Catch yous then!